How's everyone doing? Good afternoon. Everyone, Daryl, you're doing well? Excellent. So welcome. There are plenty of seats. Find a seat. Sit down next to someone nice. Say hello. Some of us spent some time this morning spending little time with the Lewis Hyde text. And in that text, we were talking about thresholds and exchanges. And I sort of have always believed in the magic of thresholds, the spaces that are between. And I've thought a lot in my life about sponges, those beings that sit between plants and animals. I come from a faith tradition where we think a lot about angels, the beings that sit between us and God. And this is a threshold space because we are going to close out the ArtPlace Summit and we are going to welcome in the Rural Generation Summit. So the first thing I'd like to do is to do a couple of thank yous and acknowledgments about those of us who spent the last 2.5 days together. And then the next thing I'd like to do is welcome in those of you who are joining us for the next 2.5 days. So the first thing that I would like to do is ask anyone here who's from Mississippi to either stand or raise your hand as you're able. And the rest of us would love to thank you for inviting us in, for welcoming us. I think I can speak for everyone and say we've all fallen in love with people and with things here and with the magic that happens here, so thank you for that. The next thing I'd like to do is acknowledge our colleagues from Looking Glass Creative who have made all of the logistics work. So Stephanie Kaufman and her entire team are the ones who've made everything happen. So Stephanie, thank you, and all your colleagues for that. And then lastly, I'd love to thank my colleagues at ArtPlace. And can I just ask my colleagues from ArtPlace to stand up? Because these are the people around the room who have made everything happen. Everything good was because of one of them, and in particular, Sarah Westlake, Mari Rosa Garcia, and Adam Erickson. Adam, if you could just stand up. Adam's really been the one who's made everything happen. And then, so just as importantly, I'd now like to welcome in the rural generation community who are joining us. And there are going to be about 200 of us who think and work in rural spaces who are going to be spending some time across a little bit of the Delta over the next few days. And I'm sort of most excited about the fact that there are 80 people who will both attend the ArtPlace Summit and who will attend the Rural Generation. So we're the double headers. Who are the double headers in the room who are doing both? Excellent. And one of the many things that makes this special is that this will be one of many celebrations of Apple Shop's 50th anniversary. And I think Apple Shop... Is Apple Shop in the room? Apple Shop folks, stand up. Yeah, Apple Shop folks, thank you. And I do have to say, I think you guys have had more 50th anniversary parties than I've had 39th birthdays. So I think that's awesome. So Rural Generation, the conference that's going to take place over the next 2.5 days, has been a coalition of folks who've come together from ArtPlace America, from the Center for Rural Strategies, from the First Peoples Fund, from the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production, from the National Consortium of Creative Placemaking, and from RUPRI, the Rural Policy Research Institute, from Springboard for the Arts, and with the host partner, Alternate Roots, and with great support from the National Endowment for the Arts. So thank all of you from all of those organizations for making this happen. And in particular, are Matt Fluharty and Savannah Barrett in the room? I want to thank you to stand up as you're able. These are the two folks who are going to make sure that we have a great time over the next few days. So thank you guys so much for that. They've been ably supported and assisted by executive and working group members and by our hosts from Mississippi. And I'm really looking forward to giving up this podium and not being back up here for the next 2.5 days. And so I just want to say I'll be back at the end of this panel to wish you a proper farewell. But it's now my pleasure to introduce a longtime colleague, favorite colleague of mine, Jennifer Hughes from the National Endowment for the Arts, who is going to kick us off. So Jen, come take the podium. Please make her feel welcome.
All right, thank you all. It is an incredible privilege and honor to be with you here today. Thank you to Jamie and the ArtPlace team, and absolutely thanks to Matthew Fluharty and Savannah Barrett for their incredible leadership at Rural Generation and Art of the Rural. I really admire you. You're extraordinary partners in this work, and it's just a true honor to be standing on stage and looking out to all these beautiful faces in the audience. And to be here in Jackson for the entirety of the week. It's been incredibly energizing. So when I took a job at the National Endowment for the Arts 8.5 years ago to support the design and creative placemaking program, I could not possibly have imagined this audience here today. Where we collectively are, it's really quite incredible. Sold-out conferences of over 450 participants at ArtPlace, followed by 250 folks who will continue on into the Rural Generation Conference, who are fiercely, fiercely passionate about the role of artists, designers, culture bearers, as leaders who are inspiring and driving creative visions in their local communities. And as I look out into the audience, my heart swells with gratitude to all of you. I feel incredibly lucky and fortunate to work at the National Endowment for the Arts because each day I am exposed to your inspiring creative practice. I've been truly humbled by the work that you all do and your stewarding in rural, urban, suburban, and tribal communities. The entire portfolio of the work that we support at the National Endowment for the Arts via the Our Town Grant Program has been built and inspired by all of you, the people in this room. In 2020, we will be celebrating the program's 10th anniversary and are accepting applications at our August 8th deadline. So I wanted to plant that little seed. We love to see applications from all of you brilliant organizations and creative practitioners out there. So over the last 9 years of the Our Town program, we've supported over 550 projects of communities of all shapes and sizes. And in 2019, we were particularly excited to announce that rural and tribal communities accounted for 32% of our awards. And we're just really thrilled to play a very small part in supporting the incredible work of Art of the Rural in building this fabulous network of folks in the room here today. The National Endowment for the Arts' commitment to supporting the work that you do remains strong. I'm joined at the conference today by a couple of my colleagues who I might just ask to raise their hands because we hope that they can connect with you over the next couple days. Catherine Brace-Simons, Courtney Spearman, Cheryl Sheely. We're going to be here with you through the end of the Rural Generation Conference and are excited to connect. And I'm also excited to announce that today we are relaunching a long-standing program of the National Endowment for the Arts, our Citizens Institute on Rural Design. With new partners, the Housing Assistance Council and Building Community Workshop, this program is intended to support rural America through planning, design, and creative placemaking assistance via local design workshops and peer exchange, which we feel is really an incredible way to network folks all across the country. So today we're issuing a request for proposals from rural communities, and since 1991, the Citizens Institute on Rural Design has supported local capacity building and design workshops in over 85 rural and small communities. As this collective field continues to evolve and grow, I continue to learn and hope to respond with opportunities that support your creative practice. Having dedicated time for us to come together as a field is invaluable, and the past 2 days have been nothing short of extraordinary. And I have no doubt that as we move into rural generation, the ideas, inspiration, stumbling blocks, all of these conversations will really continue to forge a stronger, more networked field of practitioners. And I look forward to continuing on this journey with all of you. We know that to do this work effectively, it requires listening, openness, creativity, and humility. And I can think of no one that embodies those qualities better than the person that I'm honored to introduce you to next. Lori Pourier is a pillar of our collective community, whose leadership has inspired so many of us. Lori grew up on the Pine Ridge Reservation and is a member of the Oglala Lakota tribe. She heads First Peoples Fund, a 17-year-old national Native nonprofit working with culture bearers and artists in Indigenous communities. The NEA is proud to support the wonderful work of First Peoples Fund, which provides professional training workshops for Native artists and works with national community development finance institutions training business coaches to work with Native artists. First Peoples Fund also provides a fellowship for Native artists to help them grow their businesses. And Lori has led the way in the Rural Generations Summit Executive Committee, and I would love to welcome her to stage next.
So welcome, everybody. We are in Mississippi. MISSISSIPPI. I'm honored to be here for, I think, my third time, and honored to be here with ArtPlace. ArtPlace launched something, the Rolling Res Arts. So we have a little toy for ArtPlace, Carlton, and Jen, which I will just set up here. So if you're ever out to Pine Ridge, this little bus gets around the world. So that's the Rolling Res Arts, which helped us at ArtSpace, and our town, and a lot of other supporters, so thank you. Mitaki api, leampe tuki, iushkia, chante washtea, nape chiu sapi. Makasi tomni omani wi, imachi api Lori. I was born and raised on Pine Ridge, and grew up there, and went through as a child, went through what happened at Wounded Knee, and I think that kind of set the trajectory for me and my work, and both my grandmothers were teachers on Pine Ridge, and one of my grandmothers was the first Native woman teacher, along with Mrs. Witt and Mrs. Ross, and Mary Bordeaux works with us at First Peoples Fund now. So I always remind her when things get hard, things get challenging, that what our grandmothers went through, they went through boarding school, and our boarding schools weren't like the way you understand boarding schools to be. And if you have the time, look at the history of Indian boarding schools, because it really tried to wipe out our language and wipe out our communities and kill the Indian, save the man, as they say, all the way back to Carlisle Indian School. But I'm honored right now. It's a great pleasure to introduce Carlton Turner. I'm honored to call my brother and a member of the First Peoples Fund Tuahe, the family. Carlton and I worked together for more than a decade in his former role as the executive director at Alternate Roots, and in his new role as a director and alongside his beautiful wife, Brandy, at the Mississippi Cultural Production, or SIP Culture, Center for Cultural Production. Correct me, Carlton. Our first meeting was in New Orleans as grantees of the Ford Foundation, somewhere, I think, around 2007. I feel like a grandmother now because I've been doing this work for a while, and I'm actually really am a grandmother. When was it? 2004. Oh, wow, 2004, so I'm a grandma. So that was our first gathering in New Orleans through the Ford Foundation, and Roberta Uno brought a whole bunch of us folks together. Today, Carlton and I continue to work together through the Intercultural Leadership Institute in his role on the board of directors of the First Peoples Fund and an advisory members of the Bush Foundation's Creative Community Cohort 2. And we were both recently alumni of the Ford Foundation Art of Change Fellowship. And we actually called each other. Did you get this? Did you get that? And, we were contacted, and Carlton said, wow, we actually didn't feel we were worthy to receive that great honor from the Ford Foundation. And that was just a contribution to, our commitment and dedication to our communities, at home. And so I'm really grateful to share that space with Carlton and all the other amazing artists around the country. And then we're all both active members of the Rural Generations Summit 2019 and forward. One aspect of the questions outlined for the session that I want to lift up that was in your book, as we move into the Rural Generations Summit and as guests in Carlton's home community, which expands 8 generations. Carlton's mother is here, and his sister, so it's good to see them again. And I want to just share a story and just our working together and what Carlton has taught me. The question that was posed was, what are the tools and tactics we can employ to honor the whole truth without letting one side distort the other. So the operative word here is the whole truth. Carlton has taught me about Black identity in the South, about family in the South, and about the civil rights movement here in the Mississippi Delta. I can say we struggled and grown together through difficult conversations of anti-Blackness and invisibility, and that in order to truly embrace trust, we must grapple with the truth. As I thought about what to say, I am reminded of the hard truth that Carlton shared with me and the Ely folks about a year ago following our visit here to Mississippi, followed by a trip to Lakota Territory. He said, "When Native Americans pray, smudge, speak their language, it is very clear that you are experiencing something that is not in the mainstream. When the Hawaiians chant and they are speaking their language, it is very clear what they are doing is not in the mainstream. But when Black folk pray and sing, it is in the same song, in the same language of the oppressor." He added, "The rituals in our ceremonies are not seen as ceremony because it didn't come from the same kind of package and forms that is very clear in distinction between Native America, Native Hawaiian, and when the Latino community speaks Spanish." So I just want to say, because I love Carlton dearly, when he shared that, it just really kind of hurt me deep, right, in my heart, right? Because that's not how I was raised, So to struggle with that, to struggle with those words. And he said, in Mississippi, with the loss of the connection with Africa, language, and community, the African American culture was not identified or seen. That was our visit with Ely here to Mississippi. There was intentionally and the invisibility of the Black culture as a sacred space. Intentionality, we didn't see, right? Us participating. We didn't see the sacred space we entered. Yet, highlighting it as a space for commerce, entertainment, all that is not about our spiritual growth and development, but the gratification of this capitalistic economy of which we all live in, right? So I emphasize there was an intentionality and invisibility of Black culture as sacred space. As we move into our collective work at Rural Generation, we must ask ourselves, are we prepared to honor the whole truth? Not only through a narrative of equitable spaces, but one that honors the whole truth. Black rituals, ceremonies, and spaces as sacred. After all, it is the places we hold sacred, family, our identity, our relationship with our community, and our ancestral roots that ties us to the land, that makes us whole persons and full human beings. The charge we are faced is how do we rebuild, reclaim, and restore as we attempt to deconstruct colonial systems of oppression. The heart of the Mississippi Delta is an important place to start as we move towards an interdependent future for the field. I want to lift up my Grandma Alice that I mentioned earlier, and my other grandmother. My Grandma Alice was the first teacher, Indian teacher on Pine Ridge, along with the others I mentioned. And she received her degree to teach back home. And she had 7 children, all of them who continue to inspire me today. But what I appreciate about my grandmothers is both of them spoke the language. They continued to speak the language. And my grandma Olivia received the first loan from the Lakota Fund, which is where I started my career on Pine Ridge. And that was a long time ago, and both of them have since passed. But I found this, when she passed, when my daughter was born, Shahila Pourier, there was 4 generations. And I just moved home, and we bought a place for my grandma. We all moved in, and then voila, I had a daughter. So I just cherished those times with her. But my grandma believed in the Bible. My grandma believed in the scripture. So I want to share this piece she wrote, because she used to sit out and look out the living room window on the plains in South Dakota, looking towards the Black Hills, or Haisapa. It starts with, I shall lift mine eyes up to the hills, from whence cometh my help. She wrote, this bit of scripture occurs to me often, the reason being this group of hills that present themselves to my view every time I look out my living room windows. I have seen the majestic forest in the coastal North California. I've seen the lofty covered snow mountains of Colorado. The Seven Sisters don't compare in majesty and height, but they have a character of their own. They are lovely and serene. They impart to me a feeling of calmness and a sense of beauty. I give thanks to the Creator, not only for giving us the hills, but for giving me the sense to appreciate the beauty of his earth. Sunsets, sunrises, the variety in plants, animals, people, the seasons, and the senses to enjoy what he has made. So I just want to leave that and acknowledge and bring my grandmother Alice Sherman into the room. And I thank you for giving me the space. And I say hello to all my relatives from home. And I'm glad you're here with us in Mississippi. And we're going to have an awesome next couple of days. And I just want to call Carlton up here and say Lila Wopila Tanka to ArtSpace for partnering with the World Generation Summit. And this is your toy, Carlton, and I have one for Jen and ArtPlace too.
For those of you that don't know after that, Lori is truly my sister. I don't mean in the people of color sentiment of we all sisters and brothers. I mean that as I love her as my sister. We are family. Because of my relationship with her, I'm able to take her and the love she has for her Lakota people with me in my heart, and it's part of my advocacy wherever I go. Mississippi is an Ojibwe word for great river. I would like to reiterate that we are on the indigenous land of the Choctaw and Chickasaw people. There were many more tribes of people, their names erased by reductionist and revisionist history. But it's important to acknowledge them and understand that any work we're here to do in the name of healing, justice, and respect for this planet has to start there. Our work begins with engaging the sovereign indigenous people in dialogue and in embracing their leadership. It is not enough to just say their names. We must also make sure that we work diligently to advance their sovereignty as part of our collective freedom. In this work, as with all of my work, I need to call on my ancestors. So I'm calling my dark knight, Emmett Turner, that brave Harlemite, that straight-ahead jazz baritone singing soul that dedicated his world to those with the least. Now 26 years in the ancestral realm, he guides me with the parts of his heart he left for me to hold. My path he makes clearer, and my movement certain. I'm calling my grandparents, Emmett and Armesia Turner. Next slide, please. This is not, there we go. Emmett and Armesia Turner. They left the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina destined for the Big Apple. They, like millions of others, were seeking refuge from the terror of white America's reconstructed South. They remind me that the home is the place that you make with love and determination wherever you are. I'm calling Samuel and Epsie Roberts, my foundation, my soul providers, those that stayed in Mississippi because of the indigeneity and because the generations of social conditioning of the South endowed them with the hope of a tomorrow that had yet to come. They were country conjurers of life from soil, womb, and faith. Grandma, she could make magic with flour and lard. Each biscuit stamped with her 3-finger brand. In her kitchen, she took raw ingredients grown from her very own land by her very own hands and became the maker of Black Boy Joy. You ever had a warm, homemade jelly cake? Holla if you hear me now. Then you know what I'm talking about. Granddaddy's natural language was the land. He was a seed talker. He could talk a little itty-bitty seed into stretching deep through the soil to borrow the love of the mother planet. He would tell that itty-bitty seed to lift its head up and stretch its arms to the sky and give the world the happiness it carried inside. He spoke my growth. I'm calling my great-great-grandparents and the ones that I knew and the ones that I never met but whom I would not be. My mother's father's people, James and Leonia Roberts, There's Will and Eliza Broadwater here. This is my mother's people. Gus and Sarah Terry, and Elman and Alice Kidd Broadwater. And my enslaved great-great-great-grandmother, Kia Bradbury. My mother's father's people, James and Leonia Roberts, George and Alice Washington, and Bob and Rosa Lee Roberts. Ashe, ashe, ashe. I call on these that are still living and responsible for me being here today. Genevia R. Turner, the personification of strength and love, straight country determination. Her hands were built to cradle, feed, and clothe babies. Her faith is simply put unshakable. Her generosity unrivaled. She is the matriarch of a family that has Southern roots that are still trying to find itself, but are doing so with love each and every day. I also call Brandy Turner. I hope she's here somewhere. There she goes, it's my baby. My partner of 24 years. Without her, I could not be here today. She is love uncompromised. Together we made three. Jonathan, a rising senior at the University of Southern Mississippi. Jana Lynn, a middle school student and the smartest person in our home. And Tristan Ali. These three used their love to help me expose the places in my life where fear still resides. Ashe, back through time and forward to now. You see, I'm the manifestation of all of their prayers. Those whispered on the winds blowing through 1,000 mighty oak trees, those written in the margins of old tattered Bibles, the ones placed on the leaves of 1,000,000 magnolia blooms, prayers protected in the worn and dusty shoeboxes hidden beneath the bed, sipped in that magical elixir sitting on grandma's windowsill and planted in the corner of Cottonfield down by the river. I am the next chapter in a book that has now only taken written form, but originated in the intentions of the human heart and sang as lullabies by elders to their children and passed on and on to each generation until the day that our song was stolen. But we still have the word, and the word is good. This word is a future prayer, wrapped in a keynote and delivered to tomorrow's past in hopes that seeds planted today will continue to grow even as the land changes. You see, we know not what tomorrow holds. What we do know, as my way back ancestral roots knew, is that we have the power to imprint on a time we will never see. So this one is from them, through me, to you. I start with my family, that unique and selected few of the human species that loved me into existence. I start with remembrance because it's their love that allows me the space to remember who I am, to be reminded of my power, to begin with a reflection of an undeniable truth that there is no me without the collective love of this legacy. I am because they are. So for those of you just arriving today for the Rural Generation Summit, welcome to Mississippi. For those of you that have been meandering downtown for the past couple of days, I hope that you've enjoyed your time in this place, my home, and I hope that you carry with you a fond memory or two. I hope that someday you might return for an out-of-hotel Mississippi experience. For too many people, Mississippi is a place they try to forget. So many people I meet on my journey say that they have a connection to this state, whether it's through a parent or grandparent that left through the Great Migration, and that never surprises me. What does surprise people is that because Mississippi, between the years of 1840 and 1940, black folks were the majority in this state. In 1940, census was the first time in 100 years that the black population fell below 50%. But most of those that are descendants of people that left don't have a connection to this place. In the Mississippi Delta, you have the highest percentage of black landowners, black elected officials, skilled agriculturalists, and the deepest concentration of poverty and disaffected school systems. The land, the oppression, and the hope for a more dignified future gave birth to the music you call the blues. Growing up, you see, I didn't like the blues, mostly because I didn't understand it. I, like many others, thought that the blues was slave music. But enslaved people don't sit around the campfire and sing about how they dogged and died. You see, according to According to New Orleans writer and cultural critic Kalamu Yasalam, blues is the music and culture of free people, which began with the emancipation of African Americans and ended with forced desegregation. The blues to most people is reduced to a culture of music, but it's so much more than that. It's also two slinking bodies leaning into each other on a dance floor or in the intimate spaces of their kitchen, wondering how they're going to make ends meet out of the raggedy pieces that they have left at the end of the week. The blues is the sound of a pair of old dusty shoes walking some country miles to get to a schoolhouse that is only open after the planting, the tilling, and the harvesting is done. It's the slow, intentional speech of a Baptist preacher giving God all the glory for surviving yet another day in white America. The blues is the spatial relationships birthed by the disappointment from the broken promise of America, or the promises of a broken America. It's the promise of freedom that never arrived, or the freedom that arrived in a package that was eerily similar to the one of bondage they had just been liberated from. And like so many art forms that have been extracted from their cultural source, the blues have made millions, billions even, for record executives and white rock and roll stars like the Rolling Stones and others, while the culture itself is at best misunderstood, but most often just discarded because the culture doesn't have the same potential to produce capital and no longer lives in the souls and the bodies of the people. So I hope you came to Mississippi so that you can understand that the struggles we face here are inextricably linked to the liberation of your own communities, wherever you are. Because Mississippi, like any other place, is designed by choices. Those made by us, the people, and those made in our name. People try to characterize places like Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia, hell, all of the South, as being backwards and behind the times. And although I understand the sentiment, the assessment is completely inaccurate. The South is not behind the times. In actuality, we are more closely connected to and not in denial about our country's shared past. In Mississippi, there is less distance between us and the atrocities of genocide and enslavement than many other places. The blood in our soil and on the leaves is still fresh. For our people, Freedom Summer is not a story that's written in the history books. It is a living memories in the bodies of our elders that smells like shattered dreams and people trying to make do with what they got. And it's the place where old Jim Crow was banished to live out the rest of his days. And my friends in Mississippi will tell you that in many places he's still alive and doing quite well. You see, Nina spoke it. She knew it, but it wasn't until I made it to college that I really understood that nobody knows a thing about Mississippi. It's difficult to escape the deeds of the past when the past extends into the present and you realize that the present situation of our people is a future that was decided long ago by people that despise us, people that claim religious faith but live by the values exalted by the enemies of love. What I have come to understand is that we cannot depend on powerful people for our liberation. The only thing that can save us is our relationship to each other and to the land. I'm not so concerned with saving the planet, for she is a God and does not need us to save her. I'm not concerned with that, but if we are to continue to exist, we have to repair our connection to the places that we live. We have to adjust the way that we consume, the way we create and produce, the very fabric of the way we live. If food is life, then land is liberation. What we do with it, who controls it, who benefits from it, all are questions deeply connected to our liberation. But there is hope, because so much of our healing is tied to the healing of our land. This is where the work can be deep and make real progress. See, Mississippi offers hope because for us, the distance between connection and disconnection to the land is only a couple of generations wide. There is still deep-seated memory of a time when sustenance was part of a localized relationship between life and love, soil and sustenance. Mississippi offers hope because the land is fertile and abundant and accessible. It offers hope because the people need hope. But the choices that have been made in our name, the life that has been chosen for us, is far less than sufficient. In fact, it's criminal. And it's based in the creation and sustaining of a permanent underclass. Mississippi can no longer continue to be a place that people used to live. It can no longer afford to be a place that people would rather forget. It has to be a place where people can see a new kind of life, one that can be a beacon for what is possible, a place where the means of production are directed towards community health and wellness instead of making a few individuals rich on the backs of the most vulnerable. Ms. Hamer knew it. She said, food allows the sick one a chance at healing, the silent ones a chance to speak, the unlearned ones a chance to learn, and the dying one a chance to live. I know that because, see, I was raised by Black genius. My mother, second of 10, first to graduate high school, college, and graduate school, on the front lines of forced desegregation in Mississippi as one of the first Black teachers in a predominantly white high school. In her story, she talks about, and she's a great storyteller, that's the best storyteller I know. When in her high school where she worked, she would tell the story about how the teachers and the students treated her. The students were mostly cool. These white kids had never been taught by a Black teacher. But the teachers, they couldn't stand to see her beautiful Black face. It got to the point where every time she would go to the teacher's break room, all the other teachers would leave. And so, in her small one-woman act of liberation, she spent most of her spare time in the break room. You know, we were raised in financial poverty. I say financial because our lives were abundant. An abundance that can only be forged in partnership with the land. I know it was hard on her raising 6 children, 4 of her sister's children, and numerous foster children, and keeping the lights and water on. We've always farmed not because it was lucrative, because there were so many mouths to feed. And we had to keep bellies full, and we had to survive. And at 76, it's still hard on her. But she is still out there every day in the spring and early summer planting her garden and raising her food and cooking it on Sunday afternoons for her children and her grandchildren and anybody else in need of a fresh, hot plate of Southern love. See, love of the legacy she was birthed from and triumphed through. Love for the legacy that surrounds her in the form of grands and great-grands. She understands that in Mississippi, like almost all of the Deep South, there was no intention for our people to be allowed to be free. The ability to vote, to eat at the same lunch counters, to use the same restrooms, it didn't come from a moral authority, but from a need to maintain economic dominance and societal control. The only reason we are here at all was to be in service of American world domination. And I think the complexity of it comes in when people think that their freedom, especially white people, and this idea of white privilege, that your freedom is not tied up with the freedom of Black folks and other oppressed people of color. A new 21st century freedom because the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery was only adopted in Mississippi in the year 2013. A freedom that for Black folks and other people of color around the country has still yet to be realized. But Du Bois knew it. He said the most important gifts Black folks have given the country is a vision of democracy greater than that of the founding fathers. Black folks in Mississippi have been fighting and organizing to get us all free for a very long time. Mayor Chokwe Lumumba and the Office of the City of Jackson, the Cooperative Community of New West Jackson, the Jackson Medical Mall Foundation, One Voice, Cooperation Jackson, the Lighthouse Project, SIP Culture, to name a few, these are all amazing opportunities to advance justice in the state of Mississippi, but don't let nobody fool you. We are not the pioneers nor the innovators. We are merely the beneficiaries of sacrifices and the achievements of Black genius. Everything we do is either recreation or replication, sometimes an advancement of work already done in Mississippi by those that have come before us. Ida B. Wells, Fannie Lou Hamer, the recently late Unita Blackwell, Medgar Wiley Evers, Chokwe Lumumba Elder, C.C. Bryant, and living legends like Hollis Watkins Muhammad, Jaribu Hill, Bob Moses, and others. They have all been the compass for a lost nation, always pointing us true north. We must never cease to call their names. The issues we are facing don't belong to Mississippi. They're deeply ingrained in the American experiment. An experiment forged on the genocide of indigenous peoples and the stealing of their land and the kidnapping and enslavement of Africans, the exploitation of their bodies, and labor and the policing of the natural migration patterns of humans. The wealth created by the stolen land and the stolen labor is in many ways unquantifiable. Nobody wants to talk about it. But how can you heal if you don't tell the story from the beginning and reconcile the damage that follows us through life like a sunset shadow? These foundational truths seep through every aspect of our lives. It shapes the very dialogue that fuels the nations today, this idea of make America great again. The greatness refers to a time when white male domination wasn't challenged as inequitable or unjust. That's this American order created by force was accepted as both natural order and birthright. To move through our work days as if this isn't true is akin to self-destruction. But to move through the world as if this is the only truth is the same. There's a gulf of generosity, creativity, and love that emanates from the world too. The most gifted of us tap into it as both a survival mechanism as well as a well of creativity. As we build our analysis and understand the systems that govern our lives, we can better understand how to dismantle the parts that no longer serve the greater good, while simultaneously constructing the types of systems that honor and uplift our humanity. You see, I was raised in a strong but fleeting safety of a tight-knit Black rural community. Fear was not a trait that was passed down through our genetic code, but through the codification of violence as a means of control. I choose to raise my children here amongst their family, in the community where their ancestors roamed, because I want them to experience a love and type of protection that doesn't require them to ever question whether or not they're worthy of safety or love. And this is a question that the country is still wrestling with, especially in this time of renewed white terror. White terror. Sounds like a horror movie, right? But in reality, it's the go-to motivational tool for attempting to maintain the status quo and sustain the reign of white-identified political power. And an appropriate title, white terror it is, it cuts both ways. You see, it both describes the nightmarish conditions that white supremacists inflict upon communities of color, conditions like those that caused the earliest 20th century refugee crisis, otherwise known as the Great Migration, and other similar crises like those that are causing migrants to flee from Latin America today. But it's also the feeling that white-identified people in power feel when presented with a future in which they are not the ruling force. A time where their value set isn't the value that sets the standards for normalcy. This fear cuts through the logic of shared power, equity, and democracy and goes directly to the chant, "We will not be erased." You see, that's fear talking. And we know that fear can only operate in the absence of love. But we also know that real tangible change can only happen in the presence of developing clear and sound analysis of our conditions, working to design a competent strategic approach to change, and through the working to design a competent strategic approach to change, and through the implementation of results-oriented action. And even those critical ingredients won't move a mountain without the power of the people. Our work is to make the movement relevant to the cultural identity of the people we come from and are held accountable to make the movement work accessible, sexy, and irresistible. I welcome you to Mississippi. But know, if you came here to save us, we have no room for saviors here. If you came to hear and feel the heartbeat of the South, then welcome. But remember that my people here, we may talk slow and not always speak the King's English, but that's all right too. We don't recognize the King. If you came to find your people, to make kin, to invest in and learn from the wisdom of Black genius, so that you can share part of our stories with your community and be ready to check anybody trying to throw shade on Mississippi, because you now know the difference between people's humanity and the circumstances that they're living in, then welcome home.
Carlton, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your Black genius with us. And Mrs. Turner, thank you for raising the man who could share that with us. Thank you very much. So for the ArtPlace crowd, I hope you will carry that with you as you have easy travels back to wherever you are going next. We as a community will gather in 2020 in October, not in May. We'll gather October 26th through 29th in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. And I hope that everyone here will join us. Anyone from Minnesota want to make any noise? For the folks that are just beginning their journey or in the middle of their journey and will continue on with the Rural Generations Summit, we are going to head over to the convention center, which is out the back here and over that way. It's about a 3-minute walk from the Westin. And if anyone isn't comfortable doing that walk, just let one of us know and we'll get you there in another way. And all I want to end with, I was visiting with a colleague this morning from Berea, Kentucky, and so I was thinking about bell hooks, and I was reminded that Professor Hooks teaches us that love is an action and never simply a feeling. And I've seen a lot of acts of love over the past couple of days. I expect to see a lot more acts of love. And I hope you all go home and perform the love and act out the love that you're carrying with you. So thank you for your time, and may whatever you do next be wonderful. Thank you.